Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on this afternoon. We are so excited to have two amazing presenters that will be sharing content with us to help us through some very difficult times that organizations are experiencing. Today's webinar will focus on downsizing without downgrading, restructuring your organization in the midst of a pandemic. Now, during this webinar, it will help to shed some light on organizations that may be faced with the difficult task of having to downsize because of COVID. Our facilitators will provide strategies and tools for staff reduction and making some very hard decisions, how to be and how to do those decisions in a very ethical manner. We recognize that this is a very sensitive subject. And so if there are moments that you feel like you may need to step away, please do so. We definitely want to prioritize your mental health through this process. Now, today I'm tasked with introducing two dynamic presenters. We have Ms. Tatiana Moulton with Envision Consultants. Ms. Moulton has expertise in human resources, and her specialty is community health. And so while we have Ms. Moulton this afternoon, please feel free to put any questions that you may have in the chat feature while we have her with us on today. Ms. Moulton comes to us with a Master's of Business Administration focused on human resource management and personnel. Following Ms. Moulton, we will have Mr. John Diggs. Mr. Diggs is a licensed professional counselor. He's a psychotherapist, and he focuses his work on helping individuals, families, and businesses find their mainspring, something that plays a principal part in motivating or maintaining a movement process or change. And so I am going to turn it over to Ms. Moulton. And we ask again that during this webinar, as questions come up, please feel free to use their chat feature. If there are questions that you would like to address to me directly, please feel free to use the chat feature and select Leisha McKinley Beach. Ms. Moulton?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Leisha. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here with us this afternoon to discuss this very important topic. In particular, because we are all experiencing in some kind of way the things that have been associated with COVID-19, whether it be organizational-wise or within our own personal communities, we are feeling the impact of COVID. So today we're going to talk about some of your staffing changes and how your organizations are being impacted that way. But also, I bring to you over 16 years of human resources management, as Leisha has discussed, particularly in the realm of community health, most recently for Howard Brown Health, the Midwest's largest provider of healthcare for the LGBTQ community. And so I understand what it is to make some of those hard decisions, particularly when you talk about reductions in force or layoffs of any kind. So we're going to talk about how to do those things both ethically, compassionately, and as well as legally, which is most important. Next slide. And so like it says, you can't expect things to stay the same. And that's the reality for most of us. Can you all hear me? I think I lost audio there.
Yes, we hear you
Hello?
now.
Okay, perfect. So
We
as
hear
I
you
was
now.
saying, we can't, thank you so much, Leisha. As I was saying, we can't expect things to stay the same. And there are some hard decisions that have to be made. And so during the week ending July 25th, 49 states reported 10,723,396 individuals claiming pandemic unemployment assistance benefits. And 49 states reported 1,224,443 individuals claiming pandemic emergency unemployment compensation benefits. Some employers need to make some tough decisions as to whether lay off parts of their workforce at this time. Of course, some layoff decisions are unavoidable or are reasonable given the current economic circumstances. But where the economics permit, employers would benefit from considering alternatives to wide-scale reductions in force, with an eye towards satisfying a reignited demand while maintaining the quality of the company brand. And so, like I said, some of these decisions are unavoidable for most of us. But how we do that and how we move forward past those decisions is what we're going to talk about today. Next slide. So when we talk about those things and how to make those changes, most people want to know what's in store for us. And this is a question that most of your employees, if not all of them, would want to know. I know for myself personally and the organization that I'm currently working with, back in April, none of us knew where we would be, either financially or, health-wise with the impacts of COVID. And so indeed, companies invest substantial amounts in training their employees. Further, a seasoned workforce may possess many levels of institutional knowledge. For example, how systems work, what risk abounds, which tactics have succeeded and failed, and efficient methods of operation. Plus, there are a range of risks related to layoffs, including class litigation. And when business is back on track, employers will want to reboot through an adept workforce. And so you have to think and put into consideration a lot of those things, because you'll be losing people who are ingrained into your culture. And when you're talking about the costs that are associated with onboarding an employee, those are some of the things that are oftentimes not factored in. Next slide. So what do we do now? In view of these considerations, some employers are starting to think through some alternatives to layoffs in order to reduce operating costs while retaining their workforce. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 4 alternatives to layoffs that you can consider during this pandemic. Next slide. Next slide. And so number 1, employers may wish to reduce wages and hours of work. In doing so, employers should be mindful of the fact that some employees may have contracts guaranteeing certain rates of pay. So employers should consider the need to negotiate with them over their compensation. In addition, when reducing wages, employers need to navigate the Fair Labor Standards Act and similar state wage and hour laws. In particular, employers need to ensure that non-exempt hourly employees are paid at least the minimum hourly wage and overtime when it is due. I can't tell you how many times I have seen organizations and companies get themselves into a lot of risk and compliance, particularly as it pertains to overtime and not paying those non-exempt employees those particular rates. And so that is something that you have to watch out for when considering layoffs or furloughs, and also reduction in hours. Employers need to comply with various state laws requiring advance notice to be given to workers when their schedules are changed. This is very, very important. It is not something that you can just take lightly and say, hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to change your schedule from 3 days to 1 day. These are issues that can come up and come back to bite you in the butt as it pertains to the EEOC. Further, employers need to avoid the risk of losing exempt status for employees who otherwise qualify as exempt from overtime pay. Exempt employees need to receive a weekly salary of a particular amount depending on your state to meet the statutory salary threshold. However, exempt employee schedules and resulting salaries generally may be changed based on an economic slowdown. Next slide, please. And so some of you also may wish to consider implementing temporary furloughs. If a company furloughs its employees, it's not obligated to pay them, so long as they perform no work during that period. So when this is one of those areas where most organizations and companies kind of get in trouble, because if you are sending an email to an employee and have the expectation that they are going to respond to this, if those employees have been temporarily furloughed, those hours that they are answering those emails or text messages or phone calls that are work related, those then become compensable and you must pay those employees. So even if the employee is exempt or non-exempt, you have to be careful of those things. Okay, and so employers should keep in mind that employees whose hours are reduced or who are furloughed for extended periods of time may in some situations qualify for unemployment benefits from their state. This depends on your specific state laws. In a similar vein, employers may wish to offer a voluntary sabbatical program. And this is another way so you kind of avoid some of those statutory laws and, avoid, kind of breaking some of those rules and laws during this time. Next slide. Employers may wish to consider offering voluntary separation programs. Consider a consensual arrangement whereby employees are offered a certain sum to end their employment. If you get to that point where, hey, you've exhausted all other means to try to protect and keep your employees and staff members, then you might want to, like I said, consider a voluntary separation program so that this does not come back later upon someone filing either unemployment benefits or someone feeling that the termination or the voluntary separation was not completed properly, and you find yourself having to answer to an EEOC charge. This provides a tangible financial benefit to employees, and employers would benefit from receiving a relief in exchange for severance payment. Next slide. Employers can give thought to instituting work share programs. Some states permit employers to submit a plan to their state Department of Labor or Unemployment Insurance Division to reduce the hours and wages of all or a particular group of employees, who will then share the remaining work. Those employees will then be eligible to receive partial unemployment benefits to supplement their wages. Now, this is something that you can also think through. And also consider, moving employees who probably may have like direct services who can now be a greeter. And so when you're thinking about some of these things and talking about like work share programs, but again, these will be dependent upon your individual state laws and those things that you would have to look up and, have a better understanding before instituting some of these programs. So like I said, so you don't find yourself in a compliance or risk kind of nightmare. But I'll be on to answer any questions that you have that you may want to put in the chat, and then we'll have an open floor later. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Alicia.
All right, thank you so much, Tatiana. And again, if you have experienced any of these four options, whether as a director or manager, or you have been the recipient of one of those four options and you feel comfortable sharing, please provide that information in our chat feature. Next, we have Mr. John Diggs, and I will turn it over to him.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and to the Compass Initiative. I appreciate you for allowing me to share this space. So I want to send a shout out to us right here in the great state of Georgia, and hey over there, Emory University. Next slide. I first want to start by saying that my practice as a licensed professional counselor, it impacts how I train. And what I know about the therapeutic process is it asks the client to be present. And sometimes this is uncomfortable, to be present with your feelings, thoughts, and ideas. So it is possible today that you may experience some discomfort due to the nature of the topic. There may be a push-pull that comes with thinking about my current now and also the decisions that I'll have to make in the future. As Leisha already said, and I want to second this, that this is normal to feel this, and that at any moment you have the right to disconnect from this slide and take care of you. Next slide. My intention is to create a space of kindness And when I think about kindness, it means to be open to understanding you, me, and our experiences in a healthy way. My hope is that you will hear something today that will allow you to manage this process of restructuring and downsizing. Next slide, please. All right, let me come present just for a moment. The last time we were together, and it was probably just 30 or 45 days, if that, we were having a conversation about creating a healthy virtual workspace, right? Like we were just trying to figure out what does it feel like to manage working from home, and this whole idea of work-life balance is different. That's where we were just 30, 45 days ago. And I was showing you, hey, the type of practice that I have, I'm getting fresh data, meaning the leaders that I work for. Yes, I do say work for as a therapist. I work for my clients. Uh, they're responsible for the direction and care of others. About 90% of my caseload are leaders who are responsible for the care and direction of others. This is the data that they were sharing with me. They were saying, John, this is what we are doing to help manage this transition into the virtual workspace. Now let me be full, honest, and disclose in this moment. Yes, I am the collector of this data and this information. And yes, my job is to present on this today. But as I'm sitting here listening to Tatiana, I'm saying, oh gosh, that's right. I'm a business owner too. And I'm responsible for the direction and care of my providers. And those providers are responsible to their clients. And so in this moment, I am feeling the push-pull to be present. Next slide. To both be the trainer today and the business owner who will have to consider those 4 steps that the presenter just told us about. And I don't know about you, but sometimes knowing that I have to make a decision that I don't feel like I have the adequacy to do, the necessary training or experience, man, that puts me in a bad space. What I'm proud of, or what I tend to rest on, is some approach. That brings me comfort. It anchors me. It gives me a framework. And so today, I want to bring all of me present to share with you a framework or maybe some approach that you can take that when no other experience have prepared you for a moment, at least you can rely on some framework to pull you through this moment of restructuring and downsizing. So simply put, I'm going to use kindness today to help you find your mainspring. And a mainspring is something or an idea that helps you maintain a process or change. Next slide. You know, as a provider, I use kindness. It's a powerful tool for me because I want to be open to my clients' experiences, and I want to be open in a way where I'm not preparing to rebuttal or debate. If you think about the last time you had a good date or a good outing, or you wanted to be around someone and you wanted them to feel comfortable, we naturally offer people kindness. We lean in, we give them good head nods, and we withhold judgment because we want to find out more about who they are. This is what a therapist does. The clinical term that we do or use is from the Rogerian approach, radical acceptance. Next slide. And yes, I can go into more details about how we use kindness and radical acceptance, but that may be beyond the scope right now. What we need to know is, in the story that we tell ourselves, meaning our narrative, how do we extract that information using kindness? Well, what it does is, when you're not so concerned about being judged about your truth, I, the therapist, and the client get to view yourself and others, and you get to understand how you are engaging self and others. So in other words, you get to see how you're showing up and understand your own thoughts and behaviors. Next slide. Now, wait a minute, John, that sounds real complicated, and I don't really know what that has to do with me. Yes, I understand. I do get that. Another part is I really don't have time to go to therapy and understand about this kindness situation. I understand that too. Next slide. So what we're going to do is use a vignette here, and I'm going to do my best to articulate this in a way that it feels real to us. I have created this for educational purposes, but it borrows from real experiences that I am seeing in the therapeutic process. And we'll see how we can translate this to help you make organizational decisions. So we got a character here. And Leisha, you let me know if in the chat, if they decide what we want to name this person. But right now, I'm just going to go through the profile. All right. We have a female executive director. Maybe the thought process is, I am being ridiculed because I don't necessarily represent the population that I serve. I've also been married for 9 years, but little do you know that this work-life balance during COVID, it has put pressure on my marriage. And oftentimes, privately, I say to myself, I'm not enough. And oh, did I tell you that I have 2 children? I'm so proud of them. But did I also share with you right now my thoughts at nighttime is, how do I keep my children safe? And am I a good mom in making the decision for them to go back to school face-to-face or remain virtual? Did I also tell you about my history, first starting out as a testing and counseling specialist? And did I tell you how many times I had to pull myself up from my bootstraps? Because at that time, I probably only had a bachelor's. And while I was shifting from one position to director, I went back and got my master's. And I did all of this, if you look to the right side, managing my own health issues that had nothing to do with HIV. And rarely did I reach out for help because the population that I serve, I felt like I have to be strong for them because they are worse off than me. They're worse off than me. So in many ways, I don't reach out and ask for support. And now at this current moment, life is asking me to do something else. It's asking me to be responsible for the downsizing and restructuring of this organization. My gosh. And I've never shared ever. By the way, this is Sheila, last name doing it. She has never shared that I have an emotional attachment to this work. And so while the thought process is I may be ridiculed and trying to work through my marriage right now, I got 2 kids and my own health issues, they've always seen me as outside of the group. But little do they know I have an emotional attachment to HIV. And so not only do I not want to fail my organization doing downsizing and restructuring, but I don't want to fail myself because I made a promise to myself that I was going to take on this job and I was going to serve it not just for me, but for that family member that was living with HIV. All right, Sheila, doing it. Next slide. I hope I have articulated this vignette in a way for educational purposes. Next slide, to work through this to make it feel real for the people who are saying, I don't have time for therapy. So John, give us something else so we can know how to use this on the organizational level. And so maybe leveraging kindness, which for me means to be open to someone or a situation without rebuttal or debate, allows us to lean in. And we heard Sheila doing it, reporting it as a singular truth, reporting her story as a singular truth. But if we listen closer, and we're not trying to judge Sheila for doing it, maybe we can hear that 2 things are true. Next slide. And maybe those 2 things that are true is that, yes, I am a female executive director, married 9 years, I have children, and I pulled myself up by my bootstraps or my Jimmy Choo heels, and now I'm responsible for downsizing. Yes, that is one truth. And then another truth is I do receive ridicule, discord. I'm responsible for 2 children, got my own health issues and emotional attachments. But John, what are you saying to us? When we allow ourselves to see our story without judgment, it allows us to see things as one thing can be true and another thing can be true. The beauty of this moment, once we accept that, is one does not negate the other. They both are true. So now we spend less time debating and negotiating with ourselves because now we understand I can be a female executive director. And yes, I can also experience ridicule. And both can be true. Next slide. All right, so here we are on this training. Here's where I turn it over to you all. Now, I've shared with you my definition of kindness and how I use it in a therapeutic process. This is how I use it in training. I ask the participants to develop your own definition of kindness. Now, if we were in person right now, this is where we'll do a breakout session. I'll assign y'all to groups with nice little sticky notepads, and everybody will develop their definition of kindness. But this moment of COVID is creating an opportunity for us, for me to do it differently. So the working definition we're going to use for Sheila doing it is the practice of understanding my capacity of gratitude to extend grace. John, that's a whole lot of words. What does that mean? Next slide. Glad you asked. Over time, these next 4 or 5 slides that you'll see, these are developed over time. So I want to say be kind to your journey. For presentation purposes, I'm rolling it out to you slide back to back, okay? But understand this is a process in coming into your own definition of kindness. Well, show me what you mean, John. All right, well, let's be present. The practice. I may say to myself, this is new. And so Sheila may say, this is new. I'm learning. And understanding means I acknowledge that what is and what I am experiencing are 2 different things. 2 things can be true. Next slide. I am trying to understand my capacity to extend gratitude. And so what that means is the capacity is always changing. It's not a destination, it's a process. And over time, now I'm saying like really in therapeutic practice, we probably at session 3 or 4 now, okay? What the client seems to learn is the more opportunities that I have with discomfort, the more I grow. And now I'm understanding that I can experience discomfort and be appreciative of growth. Next slide. The proverbial 5th week in session. I now understand that as Sheila, the executive director responsible for downsizing, that some discomfort is going to come with this. Because I'm in uncharted territory and I may not necessarily know what to do in the moment and how to respond. But it's a new day, it's a new way. I'm appreciative that I can offer myself space to examine my story without judgment. Next slide. I now see my discomfort as a different thing. It's provided me an opportunity to shift from being to becoming. I'm grounded in the belief that this is a moment about leaning in. And because I'm learning, I give myself some wiggle room, AKA grace. Next slide. So remember what my intention was to create a space of kindness, all right? And to open the space up for you to understand yourself and experiences in a healthy way. And my hope was that you would take some of this with you to help you manage a process or change, specifically the restructuring of downsizing. Next slide. Now, I'm not going to give you points about best practices to do. Tatiana already did a good job doing that, all right? My space is to help you deal with what's happening behind the curtain, okay? So let's go back to Sheila doing it. Female executive director, one truth. On the right side of the screen, another truth. I'm ridiculed because I don't represent the population. And remember that first understanding that we walked into, that when we extend our self-kindness, we're not so in the business of negating one truth or believing that one truth has to negate the other. We just allow both to be true. And then inserts kindness. I am a female executive director. Yes, I do receive ridicule because I don't look like the population. And in comes kindness. I offer myself that space to examine that story without judgment. What are you saying, John? I am suggesting that while Sheila don't have to accept what they are saying, the ridicule, what it does is I no longer internalize what they're saying, meaning I don't take it personal. because I have already examined my story and I've decided not to have any judgment. So that means not I, not anyone else has the right to make me feel or internalize negative thoughts about myself, because my definition of kindness allows me to do that. And y'all remember that part of the story with Sheila when she started out as testing and counseling specialist, and she had a bachelor's and got a master's. And by design, she was promoted to program manager and became director. That definition of kindness that was developed over time is now saying, wait a minute, I've been in discomfort before. I know what it means to start out as a testing and counselor. I know what it means to go back to school and struggle, work all day and study all night. I remember what it meant to be in a space of being and becoming something else. That's when you are now in kindness, because you realize that this comfort is something that you've already been doing and you've already been working with it. Now, excuse my poor grammar. If my English teacher was on here, she'll say there's no such thing as been doing. But I hope that you understand what I'm saying. And if we choose to focus more on who I am becoming, meaning Sheila, and less about what I used to be, this allows us to do this thing down here that says, because I'm learning, I give myself some wiggle room. And so at the top of this screen, you say, it says, I'm doing a different thing. That different thing is accepting things as is without judgment. And I understand that I'm already accustomed to dealing with discomfort. So nothing from my past, present, or future is going to provide me with so much discomfort that it immobilizes me, because I am accustomed to becoming. And what I'm going to do, not you all, not anybody else, just me, I'm going to offer myself some wiggle room, because I understand in this moment, I am responsible for the downsizing and restructuring of this organization. And so the health issues, the children, the emotional attachment to the work, it's still there, but I'm going to give myself some wiggle room or grace because I'm still learning. Next slide. Perhaps we may say, kindness is allowing us to find our mainspring. Kindness is being open to understanding without rebuttal or debate. And so through this vignette, what is this thing, Miss Sheila, doing it? What is it when we look at your story? What is it that allows you to keep becoming that thing that's helping you maintain this process of change, even through a downsizing and restructuring? Well, maybe it is your undeniable ability to overcome. Maybe her story is because it says so, meaning everything about her past up to this moment says that she is more than capable. Maybe it's she has an untapped well of resilience. Maybe it's her faith or trust in a higher power. Maybe it's today you all will decide to treat this moment as an opportunity to lean in and learn who you are. Next slide. All right, John, let's wrap up. Let's give them 6 points to hone in on. Now, I know this went pretty fast, and I did say that as we develop that definition of kindness, that takes some weeks and some attention and being kind with yourself, walking with you. But here are the 6 steps stated specifically. Listen to your narrative. Create a personal definition of kindness. Unbraid the narrative, because that's when we're allowed to see that as I tell the truth singularly, maybe when I unbraid it, some of it fits in one bucket and some of it fits in another bucket, allowing both things to be true. And then your action step, you get to choose the parts of the story that will support growth. And last, choose your mainspring. Next slide. So this approach in application can say, I don't know, like me in the midnight hour, sometimes I'm saying, oh, why me? This approach of kindness says, if you can imagine it coming next to you, kindness may say, Well, why not you? Let me remind you of your own story, your own data, your own experiences. And so what I believe kindness is saying in that moment is check your own resume. And you may conclude after reviewing it, after taking inventory, that you are already overqualified.
John, thank you so much for this discussion. And I can tell you that some of the things that you said truly struck a chord with me. And I want to pose a question to both you and Tatiana. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to process everything you said and get back in facilitator role, because you made me take a stroll down memory lane and think about how it feels, you know, to have to make some of these very difficult decisions when the people who are working for you, that they are not just employees. And I know, Tatiana, you probably gonna give me a little pushback on this one, but you work with them so long that you truly do see them as family. The visions align for why we do this work. You know, we've labored together. We served this community together. And now as the manager, I'm faced with a difficult decision to have to do what's in the best interest of the organization as a whole. And I'm gonna have to do one of these four options, Tatiana, that you described, but none of them sits well with me. And not just from a manager perspective, but just as a human being who has now connected with the staff that I have, and knowing that any of these options will create a hardship within their families. You know, can you both just kind of give us some guidance or wisdom around, you know, how people are feeling personally, as Sheila can probably both sympathize and empathize because of what she's gone through, knowing that I may be putting other folks in this position doing what my job requires me to do as a manager to maintain the health of this organization. Just kind of talk us through that.
For sure. Thank you so much for that, Alicia. Yeah, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna give you any pushback.
Okay.
I can recall my first year of my master's program, one of the professors telling me that there are no feelings in business. And I have spent the past 14, almost 15 years trying to figure out how the two can go in tandem. But the reality of it is like you said, we spend most of our time with these people and they become extended family to us, particularly within community health. And so like I said, being in HR for over 15 years, I am not the person who approaches a termination with like, this is just another process. This is easy for me. And so when thinking about those things, particularly being in a manager's position, it is a conversation and it is a process that you do not want to do. And so like I said, some of the hard decisions have to be made. That's the reality. And COVID has kind of aligned us to these separations to the point where it's like, either I'm going to have to make these decisions or my organization is not going to continue to, be sustainable. And so when thinking about some of those things, and even embedded in some of those alternatives, are thinking about, those things where you don't have to get to that point. The person who, like I said, may be a clinical tester can now become moved over to the COVID response, being a greeter, or a person who is doing triage and taking vitals. So thinking through some of those things. But when these decisions do have to be made, like John so eloquently outlined, is that exercising that grace first on yourself. The reality of it is that these are things that none of us has any choice over. Like I said, COVID has put us in these positions where we are at the point where we don't have a choice. But though they can be done compassionately, they can be done fairly. And also, like I said, when with some of those alternatives, when you talk about some of the temporary layoffs or temporary furloughs, these are people that once business does start to pick back up, that you can bring them back in. And so when thinking, like I said, when thinking about some of those things, keep those things into consideration. But most importantly, like John says, you have to also exercise some grace on yourself. This is hard for both you and the employee, but also, most importantly, keep in mind that there are state and federal laws that have to be adhered to. And so when doing these processes, although you may view this person who you work for 10, 15 years with, you're viewing them as an extended family member. But you still have to go through those processes because, rightfully so, when this person goes to seek unemployment or pandemic unemployment compensation benefits, these are things that the EEOC and Department of Labor will come back to make sure that you went through those processes. And so it's most important to pay attention to a lot of those things.
You know, I'm still riding high off of this imagery of speaking for Sheila doing it. And now I'm switching. I am envisioning Tatiana is sitting in front of Sheila, you know, and I'm sitting on the other side. And Sheila is saying to Tatiana, okay, well, what's going to be my bottom line? How many people can I downsize? How many people can I keep? And Tatiana compassionately and empathetically is saying, okay, I know it's not going to feel good, but this is the final number. And then I see me saying, you're right. I see you dropping your head right now, Sheila, doing it. I do. I know this is going to be a tough decision because you do understand the shared vision. You do understand the times that you've had with your staff, the ups and the downs, but you also understand the sacrifices that it took to move your organization to this point. And so to honor those sacrifices, you have to be responsible to them as well. And so in the spirit of being overqualified, I would ask Sheila, who else better to understand the stories of your staff? Who else better to understand the relationships and honor those relationships than you, Sheila? Who else better is going to do it like you? And I believe the answer would rest in no one because it is our joint story. And so if we look at it from that perspective, I hope it empowers Sheila to understand that what I'm going to say is going to hurt, but maybe she can say, I'd rather it come from me than an outside source. I'd rather it comes from me because if I'm saying it, you know, let me wind it down here. I think the best way for me to articulate it is, oftentimes people do not remember what you said to them, but they remember how you made them feel. And so, Sheila, who else better to walk them through this process and really feel with them other than you?
And John, you know, this is really interesting, and I'm really trying to process why I am feeling the way that I'm feeling. This is not my narrative. I'm not going to be in a position to, you know, have to make one of these alternate decisions about employment for anybody. But can I just share, you know, or express that there was just such a heaviness on me thinking about what directors who are faced with this task, how they may be feeling as well. And so I appreciate, you know, both you and Tatiana coming from a space that says, you know, we hear you, and it's not going to be easy, but that it is necessary. And I truly do appreciate, John, just some of the language that you have provided about what a difficult conversation such as this, you know, acknowledging that because we have been together and we've labored together and we worked together, it was important to me that this message to you came from me. And so I do appreciate that. We do have a statement here from Charles. Charles says that I think that there needs to be a consistent conversation of the state of the agency as a whole, both personal and professional. Sometimes the outcomes may provide some discomfort, but when we look at the purpose of what we do, then the process then can be softened as to the decisions can be made. There also can be some additional services that can aid employees into separation that will ease the transition. Charles, thank you so much for your statement, and that is very true. Any comments, Tatiana or John, from Charles's statement?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, Charles. And this is one of those, because with COVID, one of the things that was apparent is that, the writings were on the wall. It's one of those things, particularly even when you're assigned to like maybe a grant. And you're looking at it, most employees, hourly employees are looking, hey, this grant is for the next 5 years, my salary is fine. But what they don't most often understand is that some of those grants are fee for service. And so if we're not doing that service, we don't get paid. And so it has, like you said, it has to be that consistent conversation. This can't be something where at the day before you're going to do these reductions in force or any of those things, that now we're starting to bridge that conversation. No, this is something that you're having all staff with your team members and letting them know, bringing them into the fold about these things. And yes, they won't have to be a part of all of those conversations, that if you're applying for payroll protection, which is, one of those things where it's by chance, whether we get it or not, because not everyone gets it. That's the reality. So you're not going to involve them in those particular conversations, but being consistent in the narrative that, hey, it's going through the experience of a pandemic. We don't know where we will be tomorrow. And having managers to kind of broach those conversations, because also it's like we said, it's painful, but it's a reality. So it's one of those things that, we want to help them even prepare for the eventuality that, hey, this may be something that happens. But if we are going up and down and giving them hope and then pulling it back, no, it has to be a consistent conversation. This is the reality. This is where we're at. And, it may change today or tomorrow, but we're most definitely going to keep you abreast of that. Because like we said, these are our family members. These are people who we're spending most, if not the majority of our time with. And so, why not bring them into those conversations? But like you said, Charles, it has to be something that's consistent across the organization or agency.
And Tatiana, I almost called you Sheila. I didn't give Sheila a personality. I see Sheila, but this is really for Tatiana. So Sheila, sit down for a minute, baby. Okay, this is from, I think this question is from the health department, and what they're asking is so relevant for this time. How do you communicate to a community organization who is now shifting their organizational priorities that do not reflect prior agreed upon community priorities? And so I'm making some assumptions here, and if my assumptions are incorrect, please correct me. It sounds like maybe an organization is having to shift for its survival, but that may not be a part of their contract, or it may not be a part of an agreement with their funder. And that the funder is asking, how do you communicate that with the organization?
Yeah, and so one of the things that like I said, most of us recognize is that organizations are having to do a lot of these shifts, and even some health departments with their staff, where they would have been purely 100% HIV clinical testing, or just HIV as a service line. Most of those people are being deployed or having to shift their priorities over to COVID. And so during this time, when communicating, like you said during the question, is that, you know, this was not the agreed upon, but we recognize that this is the reality. And thinking through some of those things and trying to help the organization trying to realign itself, because like we said, for an organization that is built purely upon HIV testing and counseling, during COVID, none of that was happening. And so a lot of those organizations had to stop. CDC has provided guidance surrounding at-home HIV testing, but for some of us, you know, working within organizations, that's not always the reality, again, because the associated stigma, people who are living in rural areas, and there's a lot of things that are kind of associated with that, and even particularly for community health organizations that don't have a telemedicine line, where that is not a part of their service offerings. And so when re-engaging a lot of those organizations, just having some of those real conversations with them. And yes, we understand that there are some obligations and some, you know, other things that are state and regulatory, particularly for a grant, that have to be taken into consideration, but also recognizing that this is where we are. COVID is here, and we're having to readjust and realign a lot of those things, but also helping them to think innovatively and creatively, because like I said, where they may be purely HIV testing, now they may have to consider some at-home testing models, and just thinking through some of those things, but also looking at some of the CDC guidance surrounding in-person testing, which of course I know that there has not been much, but, you know, just kind of thinking through some of those innovative and creative ways of doing a restructuring, while also helping them to understand that they're obligated to certain things as a part of their grant. You know, like I said, fee for service, there's some things that we just can't get around. And so they may essentially lose some of that funding, but that is not something that we want, because if we're ever going to get, you know, a part of our ending the epidemic plan, is a huge part of that is the testing and diagnosing. So like I said, just helping them to think through some of those things creatively and innovatively.
I think I appreciate you for so eloquently aligning that. And remember, I'm listening as both as the trainer today and the business owner that's responsible for providers. I'm going to try to articulate this as quickly as possible. Listen, I don't know all the nuances of variables for your particular organization. And so when I don't know something, I like to ask more questions. In the interest of time, when I can't ask for more data, I tend to lean on an approach or some standard. And so my approach says it only has 3 steps. Step 1, tell the truth. 2, set intention. 3, tell a different story. And so in step 1, the telling of the truth is getting a clear understanding from our HR consultant, maybe Tatiana, that says, what are the do's and the don'ts? Let's get clear about what our truth is. And let's understand what can happen in this process. Like when we say we're going to cut $10, we understand what that looks like on paper, but we want to know what the truth is. What programs are going to be impacted by the $10? And once we collect that data and put it all into a report, we set an intention statement. And that intention statement says, based upon the data, measured against our strategic plan, or compared against our vision statement or mission statement, what do we intend to do next? And I think Charles did this so well because he told a truth. He said there needs to be a consistent conversation. And then he set an intention. He said the outcomes may provide some discomfort. Here's the intention. But when we look at the purpose of what we do, then the process can be softened. That's an intention. Mm-hmm. And then the third part is the magic for me. Tell a different story. Look at what he said. There can also be some additional services that can aid employees in the separation. That telling a different story says in some spaces, and I love when directors say, what could it look like if? That means that director is saying, I'm already knowing it's bad. I'm clear about the intention, but now I'm open to talk about what the new story can sound like of what can we do. All right.
Yes, I love it, John. And thank you. I got a lot of questions, but I'm gonna hold it. I'm gonna hold my questions because I got to take care of this other housekeeping. But first, I want to thank both of our presenters, Tatiana Moulton and John Diggs. I also want to thank our honorary guest, Sheila Dewitt, for being part of this webinar on today. I also like to thank someone that you rarely get to see because he is working behind the scenes, but our webinar series director, Mr. Darian Bannister. Thank you so much for continuing to bring these innovative discussions and amazing subject matter experts to serve our organizations. Now, I've asked that if you will, please share with us one word that expresses the information that you have received from this webinar. And we hope that it was informative, but we don't want to go on hope. We want to know that this is what you needed. And if not, please feel free to share with us additional subjects or topics that you would like to see as a part of this webinar series. And before you leave, please take a few minutes to complete the following evaluation of today's webinar. It's so important, not only for Compass, but also for our subject matter experts to know that you received the content and that it was helpful for what you and your organization might be going through. And then finally, I just want to say thank you for listening. This webinar will be available on our website for reference. And so give us a couple of days and then visit gileadcompass.com. If you'd like to use this content today as a training session for your organization, please feel free to do so. Well, this concludes our webinar on today, and thank you again so much for joining us. We do hope that you continue to remain safe and well. Until next time.